Welcome back to Stare. If you're ready to uncover the hidden psychology behind betrayal, emotional detachment, and the uncomfortable truths that most people avoid discussing, you're in the right place. Let's dive into what really happens beneath the surface when guilt seems to disappear. What hurts the most isn't always the betrayal itself. It's seeing someone who broke your trust act as if nothing happened. Today, we're uncovering the psychology behind why guilt sometimes disappears and what that really says about emotional detachment, not your worth. Have you ever looked at a situation like this and wondered how someone could betray the person who loved, supported, and stood beside them without showing any sign of guilt? It's a question that stays with a lot of men. The answer is often far more complicated than the betrayal itself. It usually starts with the way the mind slowly justifies what happened. Before we go any further, make sure to subscribe because we're going to explore uncomfortable psychological truths that most people avoid talking about. In many situations, a woman who cheats isn't acting from pure cruelty. More often, she's been emotionally disconnecting long before anyone else notices. While the relationship may still look normal from the outside, inside her mind, it already feels like it's ending. By the time she crosses the line physically, she's often convinced herself the relationship has already died emotionally. Many men mistake this for being cold or heartless, but from a psychological perspective, emotional detachment becomes a way to avoid inner conflict. Once someone convinces themselves that the relationship is already broken, guilt becomes much easier to silence. She may look you in the eye and behave as though nothing happened, because she's already rewritten the meaning of the relationship in her own mind. Men often imagine betrayal as a clear choice followed by regret, but many women explain it differently to themselves. They tell themselves they felt invisible, unwanted, misunderstood, or emotionally abandoned. Once those feelings become the focus, the betrayal starts looking less like a decision and more like a response. That personal story slowly replaces guilt with justification. The real question isn't why she didn't feel guilty afterward. The deeper question is when she emotionally stopped investing enough to feel guilty in the first place. That shift usually begins quietly, through disappointments, unmet expectations, and conversations that never happened. Maybe she smiled and insisted everything was fine, while silently pulling away inside. As those emotions build, her internal story changes. First it's, he doesn't understand me anymore. Then it becomes, he doesn't really care. Eventually she reaches, I deserve to feel happy again. Once that belief takes hold, she gives herself permission to search for the emotional connection she believes she's missing. Many people assume cheating is only about attraction or physical desire, but for some women, emotional validation becomes the strongest motivation. If she feels lonely or overlooked, she may begin seeing herself as the victim of the relationship rather than someone responsible for breaking it. Those thoughts act as emotional protection, allowing her to see her actions as understandable instead of dishonest. That's why, when confronted, she may respond with statements like, "You pushed me away," or "I've been unhappy for a long time." To the person who was betrayed, those words sound like excuses. To her, they are the reasons she repeated to herself for months. The longer she believed them, the less room guilt had to survive. Guilt depends on maintaining empathy for the person you've hurt, but emotional detachment gradually redirects that empathy inward. Instead of focusing on your pain, she becomes focused on her own emotional survival. In her mind, the relationship had already ended long before the affair began. One of the hardest realities to accept is that she may no longer see herself as the same person who originally made those promises. She believes she's changed into someone with different emotional needs, and that transformation usually happens little by little. You may have noticed she stopped asking about your day, became less affectionate, or no longer argued over things that once mattered. Those weren't always random changes. Sometimes they were signs that she was emotionally leaving before physically walking away. Women who emotionally detach rarely announce it. They often become quieter instead. They stop explaining themselves and begin imagining a different life where they feel understood. Over time, that imagined future starts feeling more real than the relationship they're still living in. Once someone repeatedly tells themselves they've been emotionally abandoned, they begin believing they have the right to stop protecting the other person's feelings. At that point, their actions feel justified instead of harmful. They convince themselves they aren't betraying someone, they're simply reclaiming their happiness. For many, the affair isn't about wanting to cause pain, it's about chasing the feeling of being noticed, valued, and emotionally alive again. That excitement can become so powerful that it blinds them to the damage left behind. Then, when everything is exposed and they're asked, "How could you do this?" they often struggle to explain because the private story they've been living suddenly collides with reality. Their tears, silence, or even defensiveness may not come from immediate remorse. Sometimes it comes from watching the emotional narrative they built for themselves collapse. The explanation that once protected their conscience no longer works when confronted with the real consequences. When you finally face them, you might expect overwhelming regret, apologies, or desperate attempts to fix everything. Instead, they may appear distant or emotionally flat. That can be one of the most painful moments because you're experiencing fresh heartbreak while they're standing in emotions they processed long ago. It doesn't automatically mean they're incapable of feeling. Often it means the emotional separation happened months before the truth ever came to light. The reason she appears untouched isn't necessarily because she lacks emotions. In many cases, it's because she gradually trained herself to stop feeling guilty. Long before the affair happened, she had already started shutting down the empathy she once had for you. Every disagreement, every disappointment, every moment she believed you didn't truly understand her became another reason she used to emotionally pull away. Little by little, she created distance between the woman she was when she loved you and the woman she became afterward. Once that emotional gap is wide enough, guilt has very little room to survive. She doesn't wake up each day drowning in shame. Instead, she wakes up believing her actions made sense. That's the hidden power of emotional justification. When someone convinces themselves they were ignored, unappreciated, or emotionally abandoned, the mind can transform betrayal into something that feels like freedom. Instead of believing they destroyed something valuable, they convince themselves they escaped something that was already broken. That's why she may honestly look at you and say, "You drove me to this." Whether you see it as fair or unfair, those words often protect her from facing painful self-reflection. Accepting full responsibility would force her to confront guilt and shame, and that's exactly what her mind has been avoiding. It's emotionally easier to believe she reacted than to admit she made a conscious decision. This is why so many men struggle to understand what happened. From your point of view, guilt should be unavoidable. You imagine carrying that burden every day. But she redirected her emotional energy toward protecting herself instead of protecting the relationship. Her empathy slowly shifted inward, focusing on her own emotional survival. Once that happens, genuine remorse often becomes harder to access. So when you ask yourself, did she ever care? The honest answer may be yes. She probably cared deeply at one point, but over time she buried those feelings beneath her own unresolved pain until they became almost impossible to reach. That's why she seems emotionally distant, while you feel completely shattered. To you, she's cold. To herself, she believes she's finally found peace. The problem is, that peace built on self-deception rarely lasts forever. Eventually, reality has a way of breaking through. At first, she may feel empowered by her decision. She tells herself she's finally choosing herself, becoming stronger, living freely, and taking control of her life. But once the excitement fades, the attention disappears, and the silence returns, difficult emotions often begin to surface. Sometimes the regret isn't about losing the relationship. Sometimes it's about realizing she lost the person she used to be. Guilt doesn't always arrive immediately after a betrayal. For some people, it appears much later, through loneliness, reflection, and the absence of distraction. She may eventually watch you rebuild your life, regain your confidence, and stop chasing answers. That's often when the story she's been telling herself begins to fall apart. Once she can no longer see herself as the victim, she's forced to look at her own choices more honestly. But none of that should become your mission. Your healing should never depend on whether she eventually feels guilty. It begins the moment you understand that her betrayal was never a measurement of your worth. Her actions reflected her own emotional struggles, not your value as a man. Many men carry betrayal like it's proof they weren't enough, but someone else's emotional immaturity is not something you can fix. You can offer loyalty, consistency, love, and commitment, yet if someone refuses to face their own emotional wounds, they'll eventually damage even the healthiest relationship. In many cases, cheating isn't simply rejecting another person, it's escaping from unresolved pain within themselves. So stop waiting for the apology that may never come. Stop believing your peace depends on her finally admitting she was wrong. The longer you wait for that moment, the more control you hand over to someone who may never give you the closure you deserve. Instead, pay attention to the lesson hidden inside the experience. Her choices reveal her inner conflict, not your shortcomings. Her lack of remorse doesn't erase your character or your value. It simply exposes how emotionally disconnected she had already become, and how empty temporary excitement can eventually feel. Now comes the most difficult part of the journey rebuilding yourself. Sometimes realizing she never showed guilt hurts even more than discovering the betrayal itself. It makes you question every memory, every promise, and every moment you shared together. You wonder if any of it was real. The reality is that she may have loved you once, but loving someone and having the emotional maturity to protect that love are not always the same thing. Some people don't know how to face their own emptiness without running from it. Instead of confronting themselves, they escape through choices that hurt the people closest to them. You simply became caught in the middle of that struggle. But your future cannot be built around analyzing her every thought or replaying every conversation searching for answers. Every minute spent obsessing over her decisions is time taken away from your own recovery. Your focus now should be becoming stronger than the version of yourself this betrayal tried to destroy. Remember this: her emotional numbness isn't strength, it's avoidance. It only looks powerful because it postpones accountability. One day, when distractions disappear and she is left alone with herself, she may finally have to face everything she spent so long avoiding. But by then, your life shouldn't be waiting for that moment. Your strength comes from doing what she couldn't do, accepting reality, learning from pain, taking responsibility for your own growth, and refusing to let betrayal define your future. Emotionally strong men don't allow suffering to become their identity. They turn it into wisdom. They learn to recognize emotional withdrawal sooner. They stop chasing closure from people who refuse accountability. And they use painful experiences to build healthier relationships moving forward. So if this message speaks to what you're going through, remember this. Her silence isn't proof of healing. It may simply be avoidance. Her calm isn't always acceptance. It can be denial. But your pain, if you choose to grow through it instead of remaining trapped inside it, can become the beginning of your greatest transformation. It can shape you into a man whose confidence, self-respect, and inner peace can never again be destroyed by someone else's choices. Your greatest victory isn't watching them feel guilty, it's reaching a place where you no longer need them to. Choose growth over resentment, wisdom over revenge, and never let someone else's choices define your worth. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to Puck4, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Too many men are comforted with easy answers when what they really need is the truth. And sometimes it's the hardest truth that finally helps you move forward.